These are those little creatures you've probably seen in a kit at a toy store or a pet shop, sold as Aquasaurs or Triassic Triops, packaged in a little box with some dried sand and a promise that you can hatch your own living dinosaurs overnight. And honestly, the whole thing is genuinely incredible. You add water, you wait a day, and suddenly you've got these ancient three-eyed critters scuttling around the bottom of a bowl like something out of a prehistoric fever dream. The videos are everywhere. People are hatching millions of them. It looks like the coolest hobby in the world. But here's the thing nobody is telling you. And I mean nobody in the hobby space is talking about this. What happens when those dinosaur eggs end up in your aquarium? Or worse, get tipped into a puddle outside? Because these aren't just quirky little pets. They are, biologically speaking, one of the most aggressively engineered survival machines on the planet. And the gap between adorable kit pet and ecological problem is a lot smaller than the packaging suggests. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly what triops actually are, what their eggs are physically capable of doing, and why releasing them, or even just being careless with the water and substrate from your tank, is something you genuinely need to think twice about. We'll cover what they do inside a community aquarium, what they do in the wild if they get out, and the one thing about their eggs that most people never even consider, which is honestly the most alarming part of all of this. Stick around for that one, because it changes everything. Let's start with what these animals actually are, because the marketing does a really good job of making them sound cute and harmless. In temporary ponds, tadpole shrimps have been identified as keystone predators, meaning they don't just participate in the food web, they shape it. Notostracans are omnivorous, eating small animals such as fish and fairy shrimp. In the wild, a triops in a desert pool is the apex invertebrate. It eats fairy shrimp, insect larvae, worms, tadpoles, and anything small enough to go in its mouth. It bulldozes the bottom constantly, sifting through mud for food, and it does this fast. Their life cycle is rapid. They reach adulthood in 2 to 3 weeks and can lay eggs capable of surviving several years in dormancy. 2 to 3 weeks from egg to full-grown, reproducing adult. Think about that. Whatever pond or puddle they land in, they have already taken over before most other animals have even had time to react. And the eggs, this is where it gets genuinely strange. When the pool evaporates, adult triops perish, but they leave behind thousands of highly durable cysts. These eggs enter a state of cryptobiosis, a metabolic shutdown so profound that the organism can withstand years of extreme heat and freezing temperatures. There are eggs that were proven viable after 27 years, and they are suspected to be able to survive much longer than that. 27 years. That egg sitting in the substrate of your tank right now could hatch in a puddle in your garden in the 2050s. That's not an exaggeration. That's just the biology. Now, before we get into the bigger picture, I want to take a moment and genuinely thank every single one of you who subscribes and leaves comments on this channel. YouTube makes it incredibly hard for small channels to get seen by other aquarium enthusiasts, and I put a serious amount of time and research into every video I make. So, if you've been watching and haven't subscribed yet, please do. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to channels like this one. And here's something fun. I'm doing a giveaway of Amazon gift cards worth $100 once we hit 1,000 subscribers. I'll randomly select a winner from subscribers and commenters, so subscribe, drop a comment below, share this video, and as soon as we hit that milestone, we'll pick a winner. Now, back to the dinosaurs. So let's talk about what triops actually do inside your aquarium, because this is the part that surprises most people who add them to a community tank, thinking they'll be an interesting novelty. The most immediate and obvious problem is the sediment. In Californian rice paddies, the species Triops longicaudatus is considered a pest because it stirs up sediment, preventing light from reaching the rice seedlings. Now think about what that means in your carefully planted aquarium. Their foraging behavior causes water to become muddy, which reduces light penetration to submerged seedlings and consequently delays the development of the rice plant. And the same principle applies directly to your aquatic plants. A single Triops bulldozing through your substrate will cloud your water, uproot your plants, and bury your carefully arranged hardscape. If you've spent money on CO2, quality substrate, and a planted layout, a Triops will undo weeks of work in a matter of days. People in the hobby videos always laugh about the murky water. In a display tank, it's not funny, it's a disaster. But the sediment problem is actually the minor issue. The bigger one is behavioral. Research into predator-prey dynamics in fish shows that the mere presence of an active, unfamiliar, fast-moving animal in a tank, something that digs and darts and behaves like a threat, is enough to change how fish behave, even if it never directly harms them. Shy or subordinate fish will hide more. They'll feed less. They'll avoid areas of the tank they used to use. A Triops moving frantically across the bottom of your community tank is, from your fish's perspective, a constant, unpredictable threat. Over time, that chronic low-level stress suppresses immune function, reduces feeding, and can quietly push fish toward illness. The same mechanism we see with any chronic environmental stressor in a closed system. And then, there's the predation itself. They may chew off the coleoptile and roots of seedlings, and uproot seedlings with their digging and feeding activity. That's what they do to rice plants. To small fish fry, shrimp, and invertebrates in your tank, they're even more direct. If you're keeping cherry shrimp, small nanofish, or breeding anything, a Triops is a genuine predator in that space. It will hunt. And because it reaches full size in under 2 weeks, by the time you realize what's happening, it's already been doing damage for days. Now here's where I want to slow down, because this next part is the one that I think most people in the hobby have genuinely never thought about. And this is the open loop I planted at the beginning of this video. The reason I said releasing these things, or even being careless with the water, is something you need to take seriously. Let's talk about what happens when Triops eggs get out. Most Triops can reproduce by parthenogenesis. In parthenogenesis, an egg develops into an embryo without having been fertilized by the spermatozoa of a male. This has allowed many populations to become female-biased, where males occur infrequently, sometimes less than one male for every 100 females. What that means in practice is that a single escaped Triops, one individual, is genetically capable of founding an entire population if it reaches a suitable pond. You don't need a breeding pair. You don't need a colony. One animal, or even just a handful of its eggs in a cup of discarded tank water, is enough. And the eggs don't need much help getting around. These tiny eggs can blow around with the wind as well, ready to land in a ditch puddle and colonize new territory with another generation of Triops. The eggs are also sticky. They bind to sand grains with an acidic secretion that helps them resist being washed away, which also makes them excellent hitchhikers on nets, boots, hoses, and filters. These eggs can withstand being dried out, frozen, exposed to radiation, and even pass through the digestive systems of animals. So once those eggs are in a natural wetland, the birds that visit that wetland become dispersal agents. The mud on your boots becomes a delivery vehicle. The water you pour down the drain can carry them into storm systems. Loose pets may amplify the challenges already faced by many at-risk species, including limiting access to food, habitat destruction, and competition for space. Authorities in Spain have explicitly flagged Triops longicaudatus as a non-native crustacean whose main introduction pathway is the aquarium trade and deliberate release, warning about risks like habitat alteration, competitive displacement, and disease transmission if it ever establishes. And this isn't a hypothetical concern from a country with no experience of it. The tadpole shrimp is a vernal pool crustacean that has emerged as a significant pest for many rice farmers in California. The shrimp damage rice by directly feeding on the germinating plants and by dislodging seedlings as they forage for food in the mud. Severe infestations can cause significant stand loss. This is a creature that rice agronomists are actively spending money to control with pesticides. Currently, Lambda-cyhalothrin is the commercial standard and sole management practice for triops, but resistance appears to be emerging. The same animal sold in a children's kit at a toy store is now developing resistance to the pesticides used to manage it in agricultural fields. That's the gap between the marketing and the reality. And here's the part that doesn't get discussed at all. Not in any hobby video I've ever seen. Not all triops eggs hatch at once. That's by design. The biological engine behind this survival is Diapause. This programmed state of dormancy prevents embryos from hatching prematurely during brief, inadequate rainfall events. A portion of the egg bank deliberately waits for a later wet season. So a single release doesn't just create one generation of triops. It creates a long-lasting egg bank in the sediment that can keep seeding new generations for years, potentially decades, after the original animals are long gone. You tip a cup of tank water into a ditch once, and that ditch has a triops problem for the next 20 years. Invasive species pose ecological, social, and economic challenges by accelerating biodiversity loss and altering the composition of natural ecological structures. They are considered one of Canada's greatest threats to the survival of wild animal and plant life, and the pet release pathway creates additional pressure on ecological communities. Canada's Don't Let It Loose campaign specifically warns against dumping any aquarium pets, water, or substrate into storm drains, ponds, or municipal systems, and that guidance covers triops directly, even though most people would never think of them as a release risk. So, what do you actually do if you're keeping triops and you want to be responsible about it? First, never release them or their water into any natural body of water, drain, or outdoor puddle. That includes the water change water, the substrate, and the sand. Treat it all as potentially carrying viable eggs. The responsible disposal method is to let the water and substrate dry completely before throwing it in the bin, or to freeze it first. Both of those approaches will kill the eggs. A quick pour down the sink might not, depending on your water system. Second, if you want to keep triops in an aquarium with other animals, think very carefully about what's in that tank. They're not compatible with shrimp, small fry, or delicate invertebrates. They're not compatible with heavily planted tanks. They're best kept in a species-only setup, which is honestly how the hobby videos show them anyway, just without explaining why. Third, and this is something almost nobody says out loud, the substrate from your triops tank is not safe to repurpose. The eggs bind to sand particles. If you tip that sand into another tank, a pond or a garden, you're potentially spreading eggs. Dry it completely, seal it in a bag, and bin it. Here's the bigger picture, and this is where everything we've talked about comes together. Triops are genuinely one of the most extraordinary animals on the planet. Survival in ephemeral pools requires more than just rapid growth. Desiccation resistance is the primary evolutionary adaptation that allows triops to bridge the gap between seasonal rains. They've been doing this for 300 million years. They survived mass extinctions, ice ages, and droughts that wiped out entire ecosystems. The egg is not just a reproductive structure. It's a time capsule, a survival machine, a long-range dispersal vehicle that evolution has spent hundreds of millions of years perfecting. That's exactly what makes them so fascinating to keep. And it's exactly what makes careless handling so consequential. These diverse reproductive strategies, including hermaphroditism, sexual reproduction, and parthenogenesis, contribute significantly to the resilience and adaptability of triops. Their ability to rapidly reproduce and recolonize transient water bodies underscores their evolutionary success and ecological importance in their natural habitats. The traits that make them incredible pets are the exact same traits that make them a problem if they escape. The biology doesn't change just because we put them in a kit. The hobby videos show the chaos of hatching a million of them, the murky water, the bulldozed tank, the ones eating each other. And all of that is real and genuinely entertaining. But what they don't show is what happens after, what those eggs are doing in the substrate, how long they stay viable, where they go when the water gets tipped out. That's the part of the story that actually matters for the aquarium hobby and for the ecosystems around us. So, keep your triops, hatch them, watch them grow from a speck to a full-sized prehistoric predator in 2 weeks. It's one of the coolest things you can do in this hobby. Just don't let the eggs, or the water, or the substrate go anywhere they shouldn't. Because cysts can survive temperatures up to 98 Oanger for short durations, and their dormancy can persist for upwards of 30 years in the sediment layer. 30 years. That's not a pet. That's a commitment you're making on behalf of the ecosystem around you, whether you realize it or not. If this video gave you something to think about, drop a comment below. I genuinely read every single one, and the algorithm loves them too, so it helps this video reach more aquarium keepers who need to hear this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with someone who's thinking about getting a Triops kit.